Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Gentleman's Wrestling Podcast. I am Jesse Collings. I am flying solo at the moment. Um, the reason I'm doing this is because the Ariel Helwani, Tony Khan controversy, the interview, the comments Ariel Helwani has made since the interview has been a big topic on social media and on the wrestling news websites, and other podcasts have already talked about it. And I feel like I've been on this from the beginning. I've been on the record making comments first with Ariel's, really dating back to Ariel's comments when he would appear on the Bill Simmons podcast, but really when he gave the interview with Triple H for BT Sport, and when he gave this interview with Tony Khan, which took place a week from last Wednesday. So I've been following this. People know on the, certainly the listeners to this podcast will know that I do a lot of discussion about wrestling media. Our last episode with Phil Strum was all about wrestling media. Phil's another member of the wrestling media, of course. I talk about it a lot on WrestleNomics. Me and Brandon have talked a lot about both the Triple H interview and the Nick Khan interview that Ariel Helwani has conducted on recent episodes of WrestleNomics. So people can check those out if they want to see what I said a few weeks ago. But I just, I made some comments on Twitter. Those got some feedback on Twitter. And I said, you know what? I don't have the guest for this week. So why don't I just go solo a little bit and give my thoughts on kind of what we know at the moment about this interview, and kind of give my general thoughts on the situation, how Ariel has done, kind of how his comments relate to broader pictures in wrestling media, and really get down to why this is important. Because I want to start by saying that I don't want to come across like I'm being obsessive with Ariel Helwani, that I have a grudge against Ariel Helwani, that I'm following every single thing he does. I've been paying close attention to him over the last 24 hours or so, but I think this is a broader lesson for professional wrestling industry in general, and a broader lesson for wrestling media and media in general, on how things are covered, how the perception can be skewed through social media, how fans react to negative and positive comments from people in the media, and overall how this kind of fits into the AEW versus WWE dynamic, which I think most people would agree is the most fascinating thing that happens in wrestling right now. And it seems to be each week something new happens that kind of either heightens the rivalry or highlights, how important it is to the industry. And it's fascinating to everyone who, whether you're a fan of AEW, a fan of WWE, a fan of both, a fan of neither. It just seems to encapsulate kind of the imaginations of the wrestling fans. So I'll start by saying my original thoughts on Ariel's interview with Tony Khan, which he did on the Ariel Helwani podcast, his own podcast that aired right after an episode of Dynamite, on last Wednesday. So that would have been on October 5th, I believe. So that interview hits, and I have my comments on Twitter, and I talked about this with Brandon on the last episode of WrestleNomics, or Sunday's episode of WrestleNomics. So that would have been on October 9th. If people want to see my comments in full, they can check out that edition of WrestleNomics. But when it happened, I thought that the interview was really good, and I thought it was really interesting, and I thought Ariel did a great job, I think, getting more content out of Tony Khan than a lot of other people who have interviewed Tony over the years. Tony is very defensive in private with certain things. He did not share really any information on the backstage fight after All Out. He didn't share any information on MJF's contract status and that whole kind of angle that's developed. He was very private when it came to his relationships with Nick Khan, with Triple H, and Stephanie McMahon, and WWE in general. So he was private about that stuff, but Ariel did a really good job continuing to probe and push Tony into trying to talk about these things. When he said that he hadn't really talked to Nick Khan, or he hadn't talked to him recently, Ariel asked, when was the last time he talked to him? When he was talking about, how he had spoken with Triple H and Stephanie McMahon in the past, and he thought they were his friends, and Tony alluded to some sort of falling out that they had, Ariel asked, well, what do you mean by that? I thought it was a very good interview. And I learned stuff. So I thought it was pretty good. I know a lot of people, I think, thought it was bad, and Ariel has said that he thinks that the interview was bad. But I thought it was pretty good. I mean, maybe it's holding, kind of how insightful Tony is going to be in interviews to a low standard. And so even though he kind of shut down a lot of questions that I think a lot of people would want to hear answered, I still found it interesting, and I still found it significantly better than most interviews that Tony does. Not all of them, but this one was one of the better ones. And I thought Ariel did a really good job and showed his skill and his depth as an interviewer. I did say that towards the end of the podcast, when Ariel is asking about, what is your relationship with Nick Khan? What is your relationship with WWE? Have you talked to them recently? Ariel felt kind of fixated on that, and it kind of came across like, Ariel is obviously friendly with Nick Khan. He used to be his agent before Nick started working for WWE. And it kind of came across like Ariel is going to bat for his buddy Nick Khan a little bit, and talking to Tony about the promo that Tony cut on the episode of Impact about Nick Khan and things like that. And it kind of comes across like I described it as water carrying, but nonetheless functions in this instance as quality journalism, because he really pushes and he probes Tony on his relationship with Nick Khan. And I thought that was quality. I thought it was good. One of the major things I noticed during the interview was how different it was than Ariel's interview with Triple H that he did 1 month before. Now, Ariel did that interview with BT Sport, which is WWE's television partner in the UK. So it's kind of like if Triple H did an interview with Ryan Satin of Fox, right? Ryan Satin's an employee of Fox. Fox is a major corporate partner with WWE, so it's kind of a safe spot. So Ariel's doing this on behalf of BT Sport, and he interviews Triple H. And again, you can go back to, this would have been early September, right before the WWE Clash of the Castle pay-per-view in Cardiff, Wales. And if you go back to my comments then, if you go back to the episode of WrestleNomics where we talked about it, I did not like the interview that Ariel did with Triple H. I thought that he didn't ask him any particular difficult questions. And when he did ask him particularly difficult questions, he gave him an easy out to it. Like, for instance, he asked him about what was it like, people are saying that NXT was designed to beat AEW when it went up on Wednesday nights, and then when it failed, you got fired. What do you think that is? You think that's nonsense? And then Triple H just kind of blows it off and says, oh, they beat our minor leagues. There's nothing to that. Good for them for beating our minor leagues. But, that's NXT is like college football. Raw, it's not like Raw and SmackDown. Those are pro football. And so to me, I was like, well, you got to push back on that, Ariel, because Triple H has said over and over again during the height of his power in NXT that NXT wasn't minor leagues. NXT was a third brand. NXT's at Survivor Series 2019, winning the main event of Survivor Series and beating the top WWE stars. And there was this big effort to make NXT a third brand to compete with AEW. Triple H basically, he said it was a third brand a million times. He said it specifically wasn't a developmental brand, wasn't minor leagues. And he's obviously backtracking, and he's lying to you, right to your face, Ariel. And Ariel doesn't push, he doesn't probe, he just chuckles along and moves on to the next question. And I get the logistics of this, right? He's doing an interview for BT Sport. It's a friendly partnership with WWE. Getting an interview with Triple H is obviously a huge deal. Who else would you rather interview than Triple H? Maybe Vince, but obviously he's not in the picture anymore. But it was a huge contrast watching that version of Ariel Helwani and the version of Ariel Helwani that interviewed Tony Khan. The Tony Khan interview reminded me of why Ariel Helwani had this reputation of being a very skilled interviewer, being a muckracker, being a guy who went to war with Dana White. And I'm not going to lie, I don't really know that much about Ariel's MMA coverage. I know that he was seen by some people as an excellent media member and someone who did a really good job in very difficult circumstances, working with UFC and working with Dana White, who's a very difficult person to cover, and I'm sure a very difficult person to interview. I'm not really that big of an MMA fan, so I can't tell you I've been following it that closely. I don't really know what Ariel's real reputation is in the MMA world, but I knew when he started kind of dabbling in these wrestling interviews, it would probably be a good thing because there's not that many people that have kind of the skill and experience that Ariel has displayed in the past. So I was really disappointed with this Triple H interview because it's all fluff. He doesn't really ask him anything what I would consider a really difficult question. And certainly if he does ask him a difficult question, he doesn't probe the way he does with Tony Khan when he asks Tony more challenging questions. So I thought it was a pretty big contrast. And I can understand the circumstances given one is with a corporate sponsor and one is with your kind of independent owned platform. I get all of that. But Ariel's reaction to his interview with Tony, I found very strange. Now, this is before he goes on the MMA Hour yesterday and talks about how frustrated he was with it. After he did that interview, I was kind of on social media and I saw that Ariel had tweeted or had liked some tweets that were saying that Tony stonewalled him and that Tony didn't give him any answers. And I think he replied with the 100 emoji to a video that someone posted counting all the times Tony said no comment. And so it was kind of clear that Ariel thought that the interview with Tony wasn't very good and that Tony had stonewalled him, and that was very frustrating for Ariel during that interview with Tony, the amount of times Tony kind of didn't really give him the kind of answers he wanted for some of his more challenging questions. And so when I saw that, I said, at the time, I said, it's something for Ariel to get all upset about Tony stonewalling him when at the same time, he didn't really ask Triple H any difficult questions and didn't even push Triple H that hard on things. And it showed kind of a clear difference between his interview styles, between how he interviewed Tony Khan and how he interviewed Triple H. And I said, that's kind of not a good sign, because it comes across like Ariel held Tony to a certain standard of how he was supposed to conduct himself and was disappointed by it. While with his interview with Triple H, he knew not to ask difficult questions, or he was told not to ask difficult questions, or he just didn't care and didn't come up with any difficult questions. I have no idea what the process was there. But I could tell from listening to it that he wasn't interested in probing him the way he was interested in probing Tony Khan. The circumstances for why that was, we don't know. Was it because he's with BT Sport for the Triple H interview? Again, we don't know. I doubt he's going to elaborate on that. But the point was, as I was troubled by kind of those signs that Ariel was frustrated with it. And you can't, if you're in that position, you can't come out and then say, oh, Tony, stonewalled me and it was very frustrating. And I don't think Tony Khan trusted me. And it was one of my least favorite interviews I've ever done. While at the same time having this relationship with WWE and having this buddy interview with Triple H. And you can say, well, they're different. Why do you have to compare the two? I mean, these are the two interviews with the two most powerful men in professional wrestling when it comes to content generation. You can argue that Nick Khan is more powerful than Triple H, but Triple H and Tony Khan are the top two creative minds in professional wrestling in the world. And you're interviewing both of them for about the same amount of time, 1 month apart from each other. So the interviews kind of have to be similar, and they kind of have to have the same tone, I think, to maintain credibility. I don't know what other people think, but I would, if I'm Ariel Helwani, I'm saying I want to conduct my interview the exact same way with both of these guys. I want to make it clear that I have the same approach with both Triple H and with Nick Khan or with Tony Khan. That doesn't happen at all. So Ariel reacts. Now he went on the MMA Hour yesterday, and he has a Q&A segment on that show where I guess listeners submit questions. And someone asked him about, well, how'd you feel about the Tony Khan interview? And then he opens up and talks about how he was frustrated by it. And one of the interesting things he says towards the end of it is he says, I feel like Tony Khan doesn't trust me. I feel like he doesn't really like me. And I feel like he came in with his guard super up, Helwani said. And Helwani implies that that's because Tony Khan maybe suspected that he was friends with Nick Khan, that Tony Khan suspected that Ariel would be asking a lot of questions kind of in a gotcha style way, which I don't think he did, by the way. I think he asked very honest questions as plainly as you can. But what was interesting like that is Ariel's now saying that he doesn't feel like Tony Khan trusted him. Well, if you go back and listen to the Tony Khan interview, pretty much the first thing Ariel says to Tony is, I'm very delighted you are here speaking with me, because if I can break the fourth wall, I don't think you liked me for a long time. I felt like we had heat And I don't know why. And it kind of hurt my feelings. So Ariel comes down and is now complaining, oh, Tony Khan had his guard up. He, from the get-go, didn't want to talk to me. But at the same time, he starts his interview by saying, hey, Tony, why didn't you like me? I thought you didn't like me. Hell yeah, I'm going to, if I come into an interview and I'm being interviewed and someone starts by saying, hey, how come you don't like me? Hell yeah, I'm going to be defensive. Hell yeah, I'm going to have my guard up. I'm not going to be, you know, super friendly with this person when they start the interview like that. Come on. That's not how you start an interview. If you want to be friendly with somebody, is this passive aggressive attempt at saying, hey, I heard you don't like me. I mean, I don't know. Maybe they teach you that at Newhouse. Who knows? So I thought that was stupid. So he goes into that on the MMA Hour, and he goes into the why he didn't think the interview worked well and that thing like that. And so I can handle Ariel saying he doesn't like the interview and saying that he didn't feel like Tony Khan gave him a lot. That I can live with that, because I can also see, being stonewalled as a journalist is frustrating. And you can try your best to get information out of people, but not everyone's going to be super forthcoming with it. And it can be frustrating. And being a journalist, the easiest thing to do is to interview people who want to talk about everything. And the hardest thing to do is interview people who don't want to talk about what you want to ask them about. That's just life as a journalist. And Ariel knows that. I'm sure he does. So this thing kind of blows up. People are talking about Ariel complaining about the Tony Khan interview. Some people are saying, well, Ariel, you shouldn't have expected Tony to talk about things like the post all out fight, because there's currently a lawsuit going on, or a potential lawsuit. They're doing an investigation. There's legal involved. All of that. I don't think people have a lot of sympathy for that. I think actually a lot of people, especially in wrestling media, have come out with the side of Tony, saying that, Tony's not going to comment on that, which is true. I wouldn't expect him to. And Ariel did his job. He asked, and Tony said no comment. Could Tony have elaborated a little bit more? And could have Tony said, oh, I'd love to comment about it, Ariel, but I really can't at this time. It's a very complex situation. We're dealing with a lot of different parties. I understand why you're asking, but I really can't get that far into it. He could have said that, but that's not really that much different than what he said, which was basically like, no comment. I know you have to ask, but I can't talk about it. It's giving us no information either way. So there's no real difference, to me at least, as a journalist. I can't quote him on the quote I'd write down from that is not going to be any different. It's both. He basically had no comment. So we talked about a lot that yesterday. Today, Ariel, I heard Dave Meltzer and Brian Alvarez talk about Ariel's comments. They talked about it for about 20 minutes on today's Wrestling Observer Radio. Dave was very diplomatic with how he talked about Ariel, and said that he understands the frustration Ariel had talking to Tony Khan. And many people have interviewed Tony Khan, and many people that have attended the press conferences, and many people that have, and many people that have watched the press conferences, I'm sure, have had the same feeling where Tony goes into promoter mode. He doesn't always answer questions in a straightforward manner. You can ask him one question and he goes off on a tangent that's semi-related or not related at all. All that stuff happens from time to time with Tony. I get it. I get the frustrations. Brian Alvarez was very critical of Ariel, just saying he should just move on. And Ariel didn't like that, as we learned, because Ariel appeared on Josh Nason's Punch Out this afternoon. This one just went up about an hour ago. I'm recording at 3:30 on Thursday, on Thursday afternoon. But an episode of Josh Nason's Punch Out, which is a podcast that's on the Wrestling Observer Figure 4 Online network, with Josh Nason, who is someone I'm friendly with, someone I've appeared on his show a few times in the past. He's a local New England guy, so I've talked to him a few times. But Josh had Ariel on, and they spent about 40 minutes talking about the Tony Khan interview, and he talks about the kind of reaction to it. And it's a really interesting podcast. Everyone who is interested in this situation, and I'm assuming if you're listening to this, you're interested in that's in the situation, should check out the last episode of Josh Nason's Punch Out over on Figure Four Online. It's actually a free episode. It's not, you don't have to pay for it. It's not behind the paywall. But Ariel goes into a lot of detail talking about, you know, how he felt during the interview. He's semi-critical of himself. He talks about how he could have done a better job. He talks about his frustrations with how Tony, you know, just placidly said no comment, didn't really give him any more information, and that he was very protective of what he was going to say during the interview. And all that is fine to me, because like I said, I understand those frustrations you might have when interviewing somebody like that. But what's crazy and what's really like the big story here is how defensive Ariel is about his interview with Triple H. And he goes on and on about how people, you know, were asking me, oh, how come you didn't ask Triple H about Vince's scandal? And how come you didn't do this? And Ariel's trying to make this case that this is a false equivalency, that you can't get on him about the Triple H interview because of what happened in this Tony Khan interview, which I disagree with. As I said, two executives of the two most powerful men in pro wrestling are giving interviews. They're going to be compared a lot. They're going to be held to the same standard. That's just what's going to happen. And Ariel gives some really strange things. He says that he never asked Triple H about, you know, the NDAs or the sexual assault scandals that rocked WWE and were responsible in part for Vince McMahon leaving WWE in the Wall Street Journal story. He never asked Triple H about that. And he makes the comment saying, well, what would Triple H have to do with that? You know, Triple H is like the new coach. I wouldn't ask the new coach about the coach they just fired, which, by the way, you fucking would. If I'm covering a sports team and a new coach comes in, and I would ask, hey, how's it going to be different from the old coach? If the old coach resigned in scandal, I would ask, how are you going to change the culture around here? I'm sure when Doug Peterson got hired by the Jaguars after Urban Meyer in the crazy Urban Meyer year, where he was the worst coach in NFL history and everyone hated him, I'm sure Doug Peterson was asked at some point, how are you going to change the culture here? This guy that was scandalous as our coach is now gone. You're coming in, Doug Peterson. How are you going to change things? How are you going to improve things for everybody? Because I think we can all agree the other guy was out of his mind. People would ask him that. But Ariel makes the argument that it's because Triple H is the new guy in charge that Vince McMahon is off limits. And it's like, well, Triple H can't comment on Vince McMahon because what would he have to say? It's not his mess, the NDAs. That has nothing to do with him. Bullshit. It absolutely does, for a few reasons. First of all, Triple H is an executive in the company. Okay? He was running NXT right under Vince McMahon. He's Vince McMahon's son-in-law. We all know that. But he was an executive in WWE. He was the head of talent relations for a time period. He's working right under Vince. Like, he would have the most knowledge about the Vince McMahon situation, realistically, outside of a few other people. To be a prime person you'd ask, and he's going to stonewall you. He's not going to say anything, just like Tony Khan wouldn't say anything about the backstage fight at All Out. But for some reason, the backstage fight at All Out and Tony Khan not being forthcoming about that information is like this horrible thing, and it's led to a terrible interview, while not asking Triple H at all about the Vince McMahon scandal really is somehow something that you can just let go off the hook. That's bullshit. Okay? The other thing is, Triple H was running NXT and they had their own sex abuse scandal. It's breaking right now. The Velveteen Dream story, the camcorder in the toilet. If you're going to be doing these interviews, you got to be paying attention to that stuff. So Triple H does have some responsibility here. And lastly, and this is the real kicker, because I don't know. I don't know if Ariel isn't aware of this, or he chose not to ask a question about this, or he was told not to ask a question about this. But you can't come out here and say, well, what is Triple H going to say about the investigation? What is Triple H going to say about Vince resigning in the scandals? He doesn't have anything to do with that. Triple H is on the board of directors, the organization that's investigating Vince McMahon's in these NDA scandals. And what launched this whole thing was the board of directors investigating Vince McMahon for all of this. and Vince taking a temporary leave of absence because the board was investigating it. Triple H is on that board. So you can't come here and say, what would Triple H have to say about this? Everything. He has a million reasons to talk about this. Now he wouldn't, for the same reasons Tony wouldn't talk about the All Out backstage fight. That's what's crazy to me. So that's where my bullshit meter goes haywire. Now, Ariel might not be aware that Triple H is on the board of directors. I have no idea. I really don't know how much his wrestling knowledge is. He's kind of talked about, at times he says he's a lifelong fan. At other times he says he went a long time without watching and then kind of got back into it because his sons got into it. I don't know what his knowledge is of wrestling. It seems like it's probably lower than it probably needs to be if he's going to continue to wade into these waters of being a professional wrestling media member and a professional wrestling pundit. So this other thing he says about the kind of feedback he got from the interview with Tony Khan and the comments he had made on the MMA Hour. And he's talking about this again on Josh Nason's Punch Out. He talks about, the tribalism and how the AEW fans are all over him for what he said and all these, saying that he didn't like the interview with Tony Khan and all these things like that. And Ariel chalks it up to tribalism, and he talks about how, the wrestling fans are crazy and they are all over you. And all I did was just give my honest thoughts. And if people want to just disagree with me, that's fine, but people need to be cool about it. And look, wrestling tribalism is awful. I'm sure many, many mean, inappropriate things were said to Ariel Helwani because of his comments about Tony Khan and things like that. I get, like, I'm not condoning any of that. I'm not condoning troll behavior. I know when I say stuff that gets people mad, then I get hit with all sorts of stuff where people will accuse you of being a pedophile or just the nastiest stuff you can think of. So I'm not saying any of that is okay. And I get why Ariel would be really mad about that kind of content and that kind of conduct on social media, because he feels like he hurt their feelings with the Tony Khan interview. But at the same time, after he was kind of done talking about why he was frustrated with the Tony Khan interview, Ariel Helwani said this on the MMA Hour. He said, and I quote, "Here's the thing. If you were sitting there with a straight face and you were saying that the AEW product is better than the WWE product, you are just a liar. You are just an absolute liar. There is no ifs, ands, or buts. The WWE product is infinitely better, infinitely more interesting, and there is a freaking brawl happening backstage each week. Meanwhile, it's all kumbaya on the Stanford side of things. If you're going to be a super fan, be a super fan, but also tell it like it is. 6 months ago, a year ago, it wasn't the case. But right this second, if you're going to stand here and tell us that this is a superior product, you are an absolute liar." Ariel Helwani does not address those comments on the Josh Nason Punch Out show. If you just listen to the Josh Nason Punch Out show, you would think all of the hate that he got on social media from AEW fans was from unhinged people who couldn't stand that Ariel didn't like the Tony Khan interview. He doesn't talk about this crazy rant he goes on at the end where he accuses anyone who likes AEW more than WWE and anyone that finds AEW's product better than WWE's product a liar, an absolute liar. So, maybe he's obviously being hyperbolic in that statement. But at the same time, to me at least, you're clearly trolling AEW fans. You're clearly trying to piss them off by saying things like that. And so you can't be surprised when they clap back at you and they're frustrated with you because you went out of your way to accuse them all of lying. And to me, like, yeah, you shouldn't say terrible stuff to Ariel on social media. That's bullshit. People shouldn't be doing that. But if people are upset with Ariel, I understand because he incited them. You can't just point to all this tribalism as this horrible thing when you're openly playing into it by saying something like that. If I were to go on Twitter and I were to say all WWE fans are the dumbest people alive and they are stupid and they're liars and they're lying about how much they like WWE and they're lying about how good the product is because it still sucks and they're all stupid. If I posted that on Twitter and I got all these replies from all these WWE fans that were like, fuck you, I wouldn't be like, man, these WWE fans, they're so tribal and crazy. I asked for it. I incited them by insulting all of them. It's crazy to be like, oh, well, this is all just a tribalistic wrestling thing. Look, there's a lot of tribalism, I'm not going to lie, but you can't also call them all out in this, dramatic fashion and then get upset when they clap back at you. That's just how it goes. And he's out here making the case like, oh, I have my own opinion, other people have their opinion. That's cool. Like, that's a total, he said that on the Josh Nason Punch Out show. He said, I have my opinion, they have their opinion. That's cool. I'm like, well, on your MMA Hour show, you just said that if other people disagree with his opinion, if other people think AEW is better than WWE, they're absolute liars. So which one is it? Is it cool? Or do you think the other people are absolute liars and they're lying to themselves and they have cognitive dissonance about the AEW product versus the WWE product? Which one is it? And that to me is the real troubling thing. Because now we're seeing him, he's talking about, oh, the marks and things like that. Look, there's no faster way to lose credibility in my eyes as a media member than using the term marks. It's an ancient, outdated term that only the carniest of carny bastards still use. So if you're going to be like, oh, the AEW marks, they're not going to like this. Like, that's like an immediate, like, I don't care anything that you say. That's what, Vince Russo would say. That's what some troll Twitter account would say. You lose a lot of credibility when you start using that kind of terminology. And that's what we see Ariel drifting into, at least from what I could tell from his appearance on the MMA Hour. Didn't cover himself in glory. So what does this all mean? Why is this important? I think the two big takeaways to me is it shows a difference between AEW and WWE's media strategies. With Tony Khan, he's very open to appearing on different shows and different platforms. He'll pretty much appear on anything if you can wrangle him down. He's not just being very careful with his appearances. He's not only going on corporate sponsors or corporate partners platforms. He'll go on anyone's show if you can get him, seems like. And with that comes a risk and reward. It on one hand, it shows that Tony is open to harder questions. It shows that he's okay, I think, going with maybe someone he's never been interviewed before, someone who maybe might ask him difficult questions, someone who his agenda he might not be super knowledgeable about. But it also opens him up to more difficult questions and kind of questions where he's maybe not always going to look the best. And he didn't really come across super well in this Ariel interview for the same reason, because Ariel asked him a lot of difficult questions that maybe some other people that Tony would do interviews with wouldn't ask him about. And Tony had to kind of wriggle around and he was made uncomfortable, and that's what happened. WWE, on the other hand, keeps it very tight to the vest. Triple H will go do a big interview, but he's doing it with BT Sport. He's doing it with a corporate partner. He's doing it in a very controlled setting where he's pretty confident he's not going to be asked any really difficult questions. And that shows kind of a difference between, I think AEW is media friendly in a real way. They'll invite people to their pressers. They'll invite people to the, conference calls before pay-per-views. Tony will go out and make a lot of appearances on different shows. AEW talent will make appearances on different shows. Could they stand to be more media friendly? Sure. Every company could be more media friendly. Trust me. I work in covering a lot of corporations, and I work in real estate coverage and things like that. I'd love it if every company was more media friendly. Make my real life job a lot easier. But I think AEW is really media friendly. WWE is kind of pretend media friendly. They will do interviews, and Triple H, who wants to be more media friendly than Vince, which he certainly is, because Vince was like extremely unmedia friendly and did, I think, one interview in like over a 20-year span, and it was with an employee in Pat McAfee. But WWE's fake media friendly. WWE will do only interviews in a very controlled setting, and I think a lot of questions are either explicitly or implicitly put off the table. And I think it shows a difference in kind of how their approach is to media relations. Now, will that change the further we get away from Vince's era, the more Nick Khan era? And it's a big coup for Nick Khan to be running WWE, because Nick Khan has a lot of former clients that work in sports media. Ariel is one of them. Colin Cowherd, I think, is another one. So it helps to kind of have that connection going. But to me, it's very much like two totally different strategies. And WWE, for its branding purposes, is probably better off doing it only in a very controlled setting. AEW maybe is going to be headed that way soon, especially after this Ariel Helwani interview with Tony Khan. That maybe AEW is going to be maybe a little less open-minded to who they let interview Tony Khan and who talent is going to appear on and who is going to be attending these pressers. Maybe that changes. I don't know. And the other thing I think to take away from this is the power of having pro WWE voices or pro AEW voices in mainstream media. And I think that's what's made Ariel kind of fascinating to me, was he would appear on the Bill Simmons podcast, which is one of the most successful, biggest, most listened to podcasts in the world. And he'd appear on those shows and he would talk about wrestling, and Ariel would be presented as like this wrestling expert. And Ariel would say things about both WWE and AEW, and I would listen to them. I'd be like, this isn't really true, or maybe this is coming from a certain perspective. And is Ariel really going to do a good job representing both AEW and WWE when appearing on this podcast? I haven't been impressed by it so far. He's made, I think, 2 or 3 appearances. And way more people, especially casual fans or lapsed fans of wrestling, are going to listen to the Bill Simmons podcast. Then they're going to listen to Wrestling Observer Radio. Then they're going to listen to Post Wrestling. Then they're going to listen to, one of the Fightful shows, where you're going to get, I think, better analysis in a lot of ways, and people who are really big wrestling fans and people who cover wrestling full time kind of giving a discussion about it, and people who maybe can carry the title of expert in a way that I don't think Ariel can. And so I think that is very interesting in seeing how someone with Ariel's platform and his, 1.8 million Twitter followers, or however he has, and the kind of message he puts out with pro wrestling, and how that reaches lapsed fans, and how that reaches casual fans, and how that shapes those fans' perspectives on wrestling. Because if you have someone coming out and saying AEW's product is shit, they've got 9,000 title belts, if you think AEW is better than WWE, you're a liar. If that person's saying that, it's going to be hard for AEW to pick up new fans. It's going to be hard for AEW to grow their existing fan base if the notion in the mainstream media is that AEW is a shitty product and WWE is great. That's what we're looking at long term. And that's why I think it's important to encourage transparency and encourage balance in these levels. And I think there's still a lot of potential with Ariel covering pro wrestling. But I think this latest kind of blow up with the Tony Khan interview does expose some weaknesses. And I hope that he can keep improving. And I hope that more mainstream media outlets decide to cover pro wrestling and dedicate real resources and hire real journalists to cover the industry, because that's going to make the industry so much better. It's going to make it safer. It's going to make it more transparent. It's going to make it better for the talent. It's going to make it better for the fans. I mean, it's no surprise I'm a journalist full time. Like I think, the media is great, and the media is really important, and the media serves a very valuable role in our society, no matter, what your passion is or what field you're covering. So I'd like to see that. I hope people liked this show. I hope I didn't yell too loud and blow out people's eardrums when they were had other headphones in, but I hope people like this. I'll see you guys all probably in 2 weeks again. I don't know if I'll be solo. I don't know if I have a guest, but I appreciate how well these episodes have been doing lately, and I appreciate the support of everyone. Feel free to subscribe. Feel free to comment. I will see your comment if you leave it on this video. But thanks a lot, and I'll see you all later.